Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are diving straight into a massive global mystery, the Shahed 136 drone. We're going to unpack the data to figure out exactly how sanctioned nations are managing to bypass international watchdogs and mass-produce advanced weapons. It's like a giant puzzle, and we're going to unravel a supply chain that literally spans the entire globe.
So, we're putting on our detective hats today to solve a core geopolitical paradox. How on earth are Iran and Russia sustaining the mass production of an advanced precision weapon, despite facing some of the most severe global export controls in history? You've got crushing sanctions on one side, yet somehow thousands of newly built units are just rolling off the assembly lines on the other. The absolute foundational clue to cracking this whole thing comes down to something called dual-use goods. We are talking about basic, everyday commercial electronics, servo motors, microcontrollers, even the exact same commercial batteries you'd probably find sitting in your kitchen drawer right now. They have completely legitimate, perfectly legal civilian applications, but they are secretly being diverted to build lethal loitering munitions. So this isn't about smuggling rare, highly classified military tech. It's about weaponizing the everyday global commercial supply chain. Let's start with part one, the Shahed 136 mystery itself. Moving right along to part two, forensic teardown revelations. Okay, so this investigation really blew open when Russia started heavily deploying these low-cost Shahed 136 drones in Ukraine, starting around September 2022. To figure out how these things were actually being built under such heavy sanctions, independent NGOs had to look at the physical, real-world clues left behind on the battlefield. And what they found was a total shock to investigators. When the Trap Aggressor Project tore down a downed Shahed in October 2022 near Odessa, they made a stunning discovery. Just one single drone contained more than 30 components manufactured by Western companies. We're talking parts from the US, Japan, Switzerland, Canada, and the EU. Conflict Armament Research actually did their own digging on the ground. And their conclusion? They found that these weapons were built almost exclusively from parts made in the US, Europe, and Asia. In fact, the only major subsystem they could trace directly back to Iran was the engine, made by Iran's Mado company. And the ironic part? That specific company had already been sanctioned by the US Treasury way back in October 2021. But literally everything else inside that drone, global commercial parts. To really put this into perspective, a 2023 US congressional letter cited Intel estimating that a whopping 75% of these components, by count, were US made. Now, we have to be absolutely crystal clear about this. These components were built by legitimate, innocent companies who had absolutely zero idea their products were being diverted for weapons. That diversion happens way downstream from the original perfectly legal sale. Which brings us to part three, the global evasion network. Now, you might be wondering, how do these totally mundane electronics actually reach an Iranian defense contractor? Well, it happens through a massive, ever-shifting web of front companies. These procurement networks intentionally hide the true buyers by setting up shop in intermediary jurisdictions with customs gaps. We're talking places like China, Hong Kong, the UAE, Turkey, Taiwan, and surprisingly, even Ukraine itself. The network doesn't care about political alliances, it literally only cares about corporate registration loopholes and weak enforcement. The US Treasury's response has essentially been a giant, incredibly frustrating game of whack-a-mole. It's just structurally reactive. There are constant rolling rounds of sanctions over the years, targeting one network in 2021, another in 2023, more in 2024 and 2025. But the big limitation here is that designations usually only happen after a network is already up and running. You sanction one shell company, and boom, another one pops up out of nowhere somewhere else to keep the supply chain moving. And here is where we hit a really stunning plot twist in this whole network. In November 2025, the US Treasury actually sanctioned two Ukrainian companies, Ecofur and Imperative Ukraine. Why? Because they were allegedly funneling flight-critical sensors, specifically attitude indicators and magnetometers, right back to an Iranian procurement agent. It's a grim irony for sure, but it proves that this evasion infrastructure is so deeply embedded, it can operate successfully even right inside the territory of a state, actively being targeted by the very weapons they are helping to produce. Making this entire enforcement nightmare even worse is the erosion of international law. The UN's multilateral restrictions on Iranian drone transfers, which were part of UN Resolution 2231, well, they actually expired on October 18, 2023. That expiration stripped away a massive shared legal tool.
So while the US and EU maintain their own roles, the loss of the UN mandate leaves the burden entirely on a fragmented patchwork of national sanctions, which, as you can guess, are just significantly harder to enforce globally. Let's dive into Part 4, the Alabuga franchise. Things scaled up massively in 2023. The whole operation shifted from Iran just exporting finished drones to this massive localization effort inside Russia, which completely changes the nonproliferation landscape. Iran essentially transferred design data, tooling, and know-how to the Alabuga Special Economic Zone and Tajikistan. So Iran transitioned from an arms seller to basically the manager of a manufacturing franchise. And Russia's goal? To hit roughly 90% domestic content over time to insulate themselves from any future supply chain disruptions. And the money involved here is staggering. Leaked internal planning documents, which independent analysts later corroborated, revealed a $1.75 billion contract. The initial aim was to churn out 6,000 drones by September 2025, and depending on design tweaks, like using alternative airframe materials or hardening the navigation modules, the estimated cost per unit ranges anywhere between $35,000 and $80,000. The production growth is frankly breathtaking. When analysts monitored this via satellite imagery, they saw Alabuga blowing way past its initial targets. They jumped from building 7 to 10 drones a day in 2023 to roughly 20 a day by mid-2024. And by the first half of 2025 alone, estimates suggest they hit an incredible 18,000 units. Adding a deeply concerning labor dimension to all of this, multiple credible reports have documented the facility relying on state-sponsored vocational laborers, some as young as 14 years old, just to meet these massive quotas. Finally, let's look at Part 5, the future of export controls. So how do international authorities actually solve this case? Because chasing individual shipments of microchips across the globe clearly isn't stopping the assembly line. Well, by 2025 and 2026, US enforcement policy strategically shifted upstream. Instead of just going after downstream electronics, they began aggressively targeting the heavy, hard-to-move CNC machinery you actually need to build the drone airframes. They're relying heavily on satellite imagery to monitor factories directly, and they've aggressively expanded the threat of secondary sanctions against foreign banks. Basically, they are going after the money and the heavy machinery. As we wrap up this explainer, this entire supply chain mystery leaves us with a lingering, highly provocative question. Traditional export controls were designed during the Cold War, right? They were meant to stop rare, high-value, hard-to-substitute military technology. But can those exact same systems truly stop the flow of weapons that are fundamentally built from everyday, mass-market commoditized electronics? The Shahed 136 suggests that until we completely rethink global compliance, those assembly lines are just going to keep moving. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this fascinating and complex topic. Keep questioning and keep learning.